Hey guys, welcome back. So I have a quick little how-to for Tableau Desktop again. So there is many different ways to speed up your workbook. There are things all the way from prepping your data beforehand to aggregating, showing the least amount of data necessary, etc., etc., right? Uh, so the thing I want to talk about in this video is context filters. And so many of you may have used regular filters and they work normally, they work fine. But once you start getting in the millions of rows, so for example, this data set that I'm using has over 5 million sales records, your dashboard is going to get pretty slow. Especially if you have, say, everything and you're trying to show as many rows as possible. Generally, this isn't what Tableau is used for, but however, you'll often find people just need a worksheet like this sometimes. And they don't mind waiting a few minutes for it to load. And that's fine. And you know, if that's how they want to use it, if they want to use it as a digital Excel sheet, then they're using it as a digital Excel sheet. So, here's what I wanted to show. So, I put up the country, region, item types, and whatnot. And I have 3 filters here. Now, any change I make here is going to freeze the computer, and it'll take at least a couple minutes for it to load. But, the great thing about context filters is if I set it, so for example, I'll go to item type, and I'll add it to context. The great thing is, once it finishes loading and stuff, whatever is loaded after this, that's what the remaining filters will be working with afterwards. So the other filters, when they're running, every time they're changed, every time they're used, called upon, what happens is they all work independently throughout the entire data set. Whereas the context filter will sort of prevent the other filters from going over unnecessary data that you don't want it to go over through. So for example, if sorry, let's let this finish up and then I'll continue. Oh, there you go, finished up. So for example, if I set my item type and I want to add or filter something here, and I want to have just the baby food, right? And I'll click OK. I'll just pause and continue once. Okay, it finished loading. Okay, so it finished loading. And so you can see here, obviously, it is working as a regular filter right now, but for every action I make on the filters, the other filters afterwards that are not in the context, they are only going to go through whatever's already preloaded by the context filter. And that is really helpful because you can cut down on your rows. If you know, for example, that the individuals who are using your dashboard or this worksheet, that they only need, for example, baby food, then it's not necessary for the entire data set to constantly be refreshing for them. And of course, the first time there is a long loading period, but after this it becomes a little bit faster, right? So for example, if I deselect Afghanistan, go to Albania, Algeria, so like suddenly it's a lot faster loading wise, right? So that's one of the things you could try. For me, that's worked out pretty well before. Generally you have to use this alongside other features. So for example, one thing I'm just going to add this to this video as well. So these filters, this is a terrible way to give someone a worksheet dashboard. But what you could do is turn this into a multiple values drop down, and then actually ask it to go to customize and show apply button. So the great thing here is it's not gonna load or use your worksheet to start loading until you actually hit apply, which is helpful because otherwise every time I select a button it might take a few seconds to load it. Yeah, and let's see what else. Yeah, and so every time you want to, for example, remove it from context, maybe it's not necessary, you don't need it anymore, just go back here and you can click on remove from context. You can almost, sorry, I don't know why it keeps going to that screen. You can almost think of context filters as kind of like semi-permanent filters where you know you're not going to be changing them that often. And actually, every time you do make an edit to your context filter, it's going to go through the whole loading process again. And yeah, so one good practice you should always be doing as well is your biggest, most important filter should sorry, your biggest so sorry, I'm gonna reword that. It is better to have one big context filter, one big important context filter, rather than many smaller ones. Because the last thing you want is someone to be looking for something through the other filters, like the sales channel, but they were ending up being restricted by a context filter that they didn't know about, or that was limiting. So yeah, and you can think of a context filter being used like in a mathematical term. You could compare it to a order of operations kind of thing, where you want something else to run before everything else is run normally. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask me in the comments. If you have any suggestions, you could leave it in the comments. I tried to keep this as general as possible. Don't want to really jump into any detail. It's fairly straightforward. All right. Thank you. Thanks for watching.